We do 3 days of pilgrimage, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we have costumed volunteers. We also do several programs during pilgrimage. We do down-house cooking in the old kitchen so people can see how they cooked in the 1800s. We also do some medical demonstrations because we have a doctor's office. The plantation doctor has an office right here in the front yard, and we have a Civil War era medical kit that we demonstrate the medical arts of the time. We also sometimes do other small projects, spinning and candle making. We try to vary it up from year to year so things are different for people to come and see. Pilgrimage is a very special time. We look forward to it every year. It's generally when all our azaleas are blooming, and we have a lot of fun for pilgrimage. It's something that everyone looks forward to. The history of Rosedowne starts in 1835 with the building of the house. The house was built by Daniel and Martha Turnbull. This was a cotton plantation, and the house took only 6 months to build and cost only $13,000, mostly because they used all the same timber that was on the property, and they had a very large slave population who built the house by hand. The house was in the same family. Martha and Daniel had 3 children. Sarah was the only child to survive to truly adulthood. She married the boy from down the road from Oakley Plantation, and she had 10 children. Of those 10 children, 4 did not marry. And the last surviving child, Miss Nina, died in 1954. From there, the plantation was in pretty poor shape, but luckily it was saved by Miss Underwood, a lady from Texas who fell in love with Rosedowne, as many people do. She restored the plantation in the 50s and opened it again in the 1960s as a tourist destination. In 2000, the state of Louisiana purchased Rosedowne and continued the operation as a tourist destination. People love to come to Rosedowne not just because it's a beautiful house, but the gardens. We have 28 acres of gardens full of ancient azaleas and camellias, beautiful rose gardens, and seasonal flowers.
This little photograph on the table is Sarah Turnbull. This is the young lady who grew up here and then married and had the 10 children. And with Sarah is her brother William, who should have inherited Rosedowne, but drowned at age 27 in a boating accident on the river. On the front dresser, Daniel Turnbull Bowman, Sarah's son. He died in the Philippine Islands in 1900 at about age 29, and this is his sword that he had.
Is the indoor shower room that was added by David Turnbull in 1845. The way it works is that there's a cistern located on the roof, and it gathers rainwater, and when you want a shower, you pull the bell, and you have a shower. So they believe that in the cooler months, the family and guests would have still used a tub and bathed closer to the fireplace.
The butler's pantry is where the slave cooks would bring the prepared food for the family from the rear kitchen building, to be transferred from iron cook pots to china serving pieces prior to serving in the dining room. The papers on display are copies of family recipes and correspondence. The china lids on the counter are all that remain of the original Rosedowne china sets. In the front corner is the rear service staircase that the slave workers would have been required to use to reach the upper floors of the house. At Catherine Underwood's request, it was left in its original condition at the time of restoration. She felt that because of its steep, winding character and very worn steps, it told a poignant visual story of lives of Rosedowne slaves.
It was the nursery for the house, and this is all the original furniture, except for 2 pieces which were added in the 50s. One piece that was added is the high chair, and the other is going to be a little potty chair that you can see under the window. But the dolls and the buggy and the horse were all here in the 1950s, found in the attic and completely refurbished at that time. thing that looks like a bracelet is a dog's collar, found here in 1952 by a little boy who brought it back in 2000, and it says the lady who owned it was Corey Turnbull, who was one of the last sisters to live, Corey Bowman, excuse me, one of the last sisters to live here. Her dog was named Dude.
The daily activities of maintaining the house and gardens were the responsibility of the plantation mistress. Here Martha would assign specific tasks to the house and garden workers, plan out the menus for the week, oversee the schooling for the household's children, and complete her daily correspondence and record keeping. The desk and armoire are original. A second jib window is located here for added service access. In the front corner is the first of a series of built-in closets, a very innovative feature for its time. The closet makes use of wasted space on the one side of the fireplace.
This is the music room of the house. It was used for informal family gatherings or social functions where they would want to entertain their guests with music.
This is down hearth cooking, and I take shovelfuls of coals from the hot flaming fire and make burners here on the hearth. The gridiron, sausage was prepared here, then the skillet for the bacon, egg dishes, things like that. This is green beans today. And then we have our reflector oven, or a tin kitchen. This device sat right in front of the fire. I can check on the status of the meat. I can change its presentation. And time-wise, it cooks in about the same time as at home. This is how the family cooked until about 1870 when they upgraded to a wood-burning stove. It sat right here on the hearth, and there's the flue hole for it. And that's how the family cooked until 1955. The second room in the building was where we believe the cook and his wife lived prior to the Civil War. Today it is set up as a food preparation room, utility area, but it was also used as food preparation at that time. No cooking was done in that area. Any other questions?
The instruments you see before you here are the typical instruments a doctor in the 19th century would use. Doctors in those days actually apprenticed for their jobs. That is uncommon for today's doctors. You would actually go apprentice with a job with a doctor for about 7 years, and when that doctor said you're ready to be a doctor, you need to go off and be a doctor. But because of that, because there wasn't a lot of licensing and things like that, you would have a lot of quacks and people going around with cure-alls. But to kind of give you an idea of doctors back in those days, you see the instruments before you. This is a typical setup in a surgeon's kit for those days. Here in my hands I have a capital saw. These were used primarily during amputations, especially during the Civil War. During the Civil War, the most common form of surgery was amputation because a lot of soldiers would suffer wounds to the extremities and would have to have it amputated. They would saw the limb off and then wipe it clean on their clothes and then go to the next person because they knew very little about germs in those days. Other instruments you'll see here are various types of saws. This instrument right here was actually used for brain surgery to open up the skull if they had to do a release of pressure. We also have our bullet extractor. We also have the probe that we use to find the pieces of shrapnel bullets inside the victims. The bone file. The bone file was used to file the bone down after surgery to make sure it caused any further damage after they closed them up. We also have our tourniquet. Tourniquets are still used widely today. It's always used as a last resort because if applied, it might result in the loss of the limb. This right here was actually probably my favorite piece. During the Civil War, screw bullets were just coming out as the dominant weapon during the Civil War. And these bullets would sometimes lodge into the bone and screw in. So this would have to be applied to unscrew the bullet from the bones. Here we also have our various sets of knives and forceps and scissors. We have our 19th century tongue depressors. Back during the Civil War, as far as relief goes, you had ether and chloroform, which are the most common form of medicine that would knock you out during surgery. The North had that mostly what they would use. You also have morphine. Morphine was fairly new for the time. Morphine was actually found when people were trying to find new ways of getting high. and derive some opium, things like that. It had nothing else, and especially if you're in the South, you had whiskey. Other items here you'll see are items that are used in common everyday household cures. You have laudanum for pain soothers, sage for rashes. You have different herbs that were grinded up to relieve stomach pains. You also have honey to relieve your sore throats, and you have things like ipecac to make you throw up if you had ingested any poisons or things like that. Now, because of the Civil War and also many advancements during the 19th century, you had a lot of improvements, such as doctors started cleaning their instruments and making sure they were sterile and they washed their hands and things like that. And they also started licensing and having formal training like they do today. This is the interior of Rosedow's doctor's office. This building dates back to the 1840s when the family lost their youngest son. They brought a doctor to live at the plantation full-time and watch over the family and the slave population here. At the height of the doctor's career, he probably watched over about 500 persons here at Rosedown alone.
This is Oakley Plantation on the site of Audubon State Historic Site. Oakley Plantation was built by James and Lucretia Peary in 1806, so the home is a little over 200 years old. Mr. Peary was actually the alcalde for the Spanish government. This part of Louisiana was considered to be part of Spanish West Florida, so Mr. Peary was the highest ranking political official in the area. The site is most well known for the fact that the artist naturalist John James Audubon was here as a tutor for the Peary's 16-year-old daughter Eliza in the year 1821. Audubon is here for about 3.5 months during that year, and at that time he paints 32 of his Birds of America series. That's the most he paints at any single site throughout his career.
It's called a hammered dulcimer. The hammered dulcimer is either about 8,000 years old from China, or 6,000 years old from Persia. It was documented in Persia. They think it probably came from China. About 4,000 years ago it made it as far as Egypt, and about 2,000 years ago it made it to Europe, and it became a very integral part of Celtic music. We believe that the Scot-Irish immigrants probably brought it to America. There is a version of this instrument in almost every culture in the world. What we like to think is that when Christ was walking through the streets of Jerusalem, he would have heard this instrument playing. The instrument is where the piano came from. It is a percussion instrument. It's played with the hammers, and the piano is just a mechanical way of striking the strings rather than doing it by hand. Because the piano is a fully chromatic instrument, it's got 88 keys. This is just what's called a diatonic instrument because it only has certain keys. Because this one only has 32 strings, or 32 notes. If you move it, it gets out of tune. If it gets hot or cold, it gets out of tune. If the humidity rises, it gets out of tune. If you look at it cross-eyed or sneeze, it goes out of tune. So the instrument, when the piano came along, the instrument just sort of died away. But in the 1960s, when people got interested in folk music, and they got interested in folk instruments, and they started custom making these again. But it is an absolutely gorgeous instrument. The first time she heard it, we were in a Civil War reenactment. She said it sounded like angels, and at that point determined that we'd get her one. And it took her probably about 6 months to learn how to play it. She had to go to a workshop to really figure it out, but once she got it figured out, she didn't look back.
In a piano, your scale would go. That doesn't work on this. And at the workshop, I learned that each one of the bands is a certain scale. And I know that this is my D note, this is my D scale. Then you cross over. So only that 4 sets of strings gives you your whole scale. So when you think of piano, it goes higher this way. I go higher this way.
And this is a guitar.
bit.
He knows a few voice commands. Samson, back, 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 back. G, 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 G. Whoop.
He's got to wear it out. He's got to wear his like that, going through all that. Moving the climb and talking to people.
Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Worked in the cotton mills all my life. Ain't got nothing but barley knife. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Thank you all. Thank you for saying that. 1916, you heard it said, move to cotton country and get ahead. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Them country folk, they ought to be killed. Big fried barley turned to the mill. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. They raised wages up half a cent. Poor old hands didn't know what it meant. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Cotton mill girls, hard time, 10 hours a day, 14 cents a month. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. When I die, don't bury me at all. Take me up on the spinning room wall. Pickle my bones in alcohol. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times everywhere. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls. Hard times, cotton mill girls.
All right, boss man, can I quit now?
The jaws of a hog, and that's what you make bacon out of. And cut it in about 12-inch slices and render the fat. And once most of the fat's rendered, I bring it here, it cools off and gets crisp. And then we break it up and put it in a bag and sell it as cracklings. And all the screenings are taken to the kitchen, and that's mixed in with cornbread. You may get cornbread sticks out of that. And so we cook like 300 pounds today.
Old Choctaw cycles, most of us. Of course, we use a mallet. And put those bolts on that riding block. That's what we make. And I finish them up over here with a draw knife. We shingle roofs. We put them on ladders, number 5, 4-inch ladders, and nail them on like some of them are laying there. And as long as they can breathe, they'll last just about forever, 40, 50 years. But if you put it on solid sheeting, it'll rot in 3 or 4 years.
Thick side at the bottom, thin side at the top, and you go to layer them so the water will run straight down. Alternate them, and this is where the water runs down through them.
That's the finished product right there. And the fellow that makes them just left. He had a real sharp draw knife. This one is dull, and it can't hardly cut with it. But his family made them for generations. And, of course, you can't put them on the roof now because you couldn't get insurance, and it'd be so expensive. Because the only way you can make a cypress shingle is make it by hand. Once you got them and got them on right, if you could get your house insured, the roof would last forever.